He watched in disbelief as nuns reused needles, rinsing them under tap water. Imagine lying in a hospice, battling terminal illness with pain all over your body, and instead of receiving treatment, you're told that your suffering brings you closer to God. Mother Teresa's belief in the spiritual value of suffering rooted from her deep Catholic faith, which emphasized the passion of Christ. Beneath the glowing aura of sainthood, a web of controversy lurks.
I personally am most unworthy, but I brought a girl child from the street.
You know her face, don't you? The small figure in a white sari walking through the slums of Calcutta. Mother Teresa. The saint of the gutters, they called her. But what if I told you the story isn't as simple as that? Born as Anjez Goncha Bojakshiu in 1910, she rose from humble beginnings to found the Missionaries of Charity in 1950. Her mission was clear: care for the poorest of the poor. Orphanages, schools, health wards, homes for the dying. Her reach expanded across the globe. The organization grew to over 5,750 sisters with countless volunteers. But here's the catch. Beneath the glowing aura of sainthood, a web of controversy lurks. Let's peel back that pure holy surface and see what lies beneath. Number 1. Severe medical negligence in her facilities. You see, there were those like Christopher Hitchens who weren't afraid to speak out. He called her Hell's Angel, writing entire books and documentaries, questioning what all those millions were for if they weren't improving the conditions for the sick and dying. You've heard about the vast sums of donations, right? The $30 million that poured in from all corners of the globe every year. But what if I tell you that despite this wealth, the care in her facilities was nothing but horrifying? In 1952, Mother Teresa had founded Nirmal Hriday, a hospice in Kolkata, India. A hospice is like a nursing home for the sick and dying. Nirmal Hriday means place for the pure of heart. People went to her facilities wanting to help what they could for the greater good. But when you stepped inside, there was nothing pure about the conditions. Enter Dr. Jack Preger, a British doctor who worked with Mother Teresa. His first-hand accounts tell a different story, one of gross medical negligence. He watched in disbelief as nuns reused needles, rinsing them under tap water. Sterilization? There is no point. There is no time, they said. Preger witnessed patients crammed into overcrowded rooms, sometimes 50 to 60 people per room, laid on old, rusted stretcher beds like it was World War I all over again. The image of care fades quickly when faced with such realities. Even more disturbing was the lack of pain management. Preger recalled a young woman with severe burns who was left to suffer without painkillers. The agony was so unbearable that morphine had to be smuggled in to give her some relief. This wasn't an isolated case. There's more. Keep watching. 2. Glorification of suffering over patient care. Why were these patients neglected? The answer lies in a deeper philosophy: Mother Teresa's glorification of suffering. Mother Teresa's belief in the spiritual value of suffering rooted from her deep Catholic faith, which emphasized the passion of Christ, the physical and emotional agony Jesus endured during his crucifixion. To her, the poor and sick were living symbols of this divine suffering. Enduring hardship, she believed, was a path to spiritual salvation. But the Bible doesn't teach to endure suffering, but teaches that humans should love each other and stop yourself from sinning. But instead of following teachings of Jesus, Mother Teresa interpreted it in her way and became more obsessed with the idea of suffering. There is something beautiful in seeing the poor accept their lot, to suffer it like Christ's passion, she once said. But beauty? In pain? For her, enduring suffering wasn't something to avoid. It was something to embrace. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine lying in a hospice, battling terminal illness with pain all over your body, and instead of receiving treatment, you're told that your suffering brings you closer to God. That's the reality of the ideology that guided the care in Mother Teresa's facilities. Is it justifiable that her facilities remain in such dire condition despite the wealth at her disposal? just for her Catholic faith. Critics like Hitchens claimed she was running a cult of suffering, glorifying poverty rather than solving it. Was her image in Calcutta fake? Arup Chatterjee, a British Indian author and physician who had grown up in the slums of Calcutta, said she rarely appeared there. Mother Teresa was recorded as having said that her order fed 4,000 to 9,000 people in Calcutta every day, but Dr. Chatterjee, in a statement submitted before the Committee for Sanctification of Mother Teresa, stated that her soup kitchens, numbering between 2 and 3, in Calcutta, did not feed more than 300 people daily, even as a generous overestimate. If Chatterjee is correct, then Mother Teresa knowingly lied. Dr. Chatterjee spent years studying her work and found the same troubling pattern. Instead of relieving the pain of the dying, Mother Teresa seemed more focused on seeing them embrace their suffering, as if it brought them spiritual purity. He noted that instead of giving these patients dignity in their final days, the facilities turned them into martyrs for a cause they hadn't chosen. For example, there was a young woman with terminal cancer. She lay in unbearable agony, begging for pain relief. But in Mother Teresa's hospice, morphine was a rarity. Prager and others smuggled the drug into the facility, desperate to give her some comfort, but they were not accepted for this action. In her world, pain relief was almost an afterthought, an obstacle to faith. In her world, pain was part of the process of salvation. Robin Fox, then editor of The Lancet, visited the Home for the Dying in 1994 and confirmed these observations. Fox, who expected to see compassion in action, found a different reality. Patients were denied basic antibiotics for illnesses like tuberculosis and malaria. Instead, they were told to endure. Nuns and volunteers, many of them were poorly trained with no medical knowledge, struggled to provide even basic care. Fox described the medical practices as medieval, bathing patients in cold water, housing them in overcrowded rooms, and leaving them without the simplest medical comforts. In some instances, child abuse were also observed. The mentally ill children were tied to the bed so that they couldn't move. They were kept suffering without bare minimum care. While her image as a saintly figure lives on, the stories from those who worked with her tell a different story. 3. Financial mismanagement and hoarding of resources. Let's talk money. Where did it all go? With $30 million in donations, Mother Teresa's organization had more than enough to run a modern hospital. In fact, she had so much money that if she withdrew all the money, the Vatican Bank could collapse. She was practically running the Vatican Bank. But instead of proper care, the poor got reused needles and hard beds. If it is calculated, then we'll get to know that only 7% of the money was actually used in social service. Dr. Prager noted that despite abundant resources, her facilities did not utilize them properly. Why? Mother Teresa's response was clear. We are not social workers. Her mission wasn't to heal the sick, it was to express love for Christ through suffering. To critics, this was a moral failing. Her refusal to invest the donations into better care raises serious questions about financial mismanagement. Was the money used to help the poor, or did it serve some higher spiritual agenda that left the poor behind? 4. Problematic political and financial alliances. Now, here's where things get even darker. Mother Teresa didn't just take donations from everyday people. She accepted money from controversial figures with dark histories. She accepted funds from Jean-Claude Duvalier, the dictator of Haiti, whose regime was responsible for rampant violence and poverty. And it wasn't just Duvalier. She took millions from Charles Keating, a convicted fraudster behind the U.S. savings and loans scandal. Keating stole millions from ordinary Americans, wiping out their life savings. He was convicted of fraud, but that didn't seem to matter to Teresa. She accepted millions from him, money built on lies and deceit. When Keating was finally imprisoned, did she distance herself from him? No. In fact, she wrote a letter to the judge. Here is the original letter she wrote to the judge, pleading for mercy on his behalf, as though his crimes against countless families were forgivable, so long as he had donated to her cause. Another incident of her misplaced loyalty resulted in great harm and suffering to the victims of a pedophilic priest, Donald McGuire. Documents said to have been obtained by SF Weekly suggest that Mother Teresa knew that McGuire was removed from ministry for sexually abusing a Bay Area boy in 1993. Her first duty and compassionate urge should have been to inform the authorities so that justice could be done for the child. Yet Mother Teresa actually urged that Father McGuire be returned to active ministry as soon as possible. 8 additional complaints were lodged against him in the coming years by various families, leading to his eventual arrest on sex abuse charges in 2005. In some jurisdictions, Mother Teresa's actions might have constituted a serious crime, but they were at the very least evidence of a serious character flaw. Critics were shocked with her actions. Did her alliances with these figures taint the very essence of her work? And more importantly, did the ends ever justify the means? 5. Allegations of racism and forced baptism. There's another layer that casts a shadow on her legacy. Mother Teresa faced allegations of racism. She was accused of having a colonial mindset, particularly in her treatment of those with darker skin. Some critics claimed she viewed the people she helped, particularly in places like Calcutta, not as equals, but as savages to be saved. Her approach resembled the white savior complex, a notion that the suffering masses were merely there to be rescued by someone from the outside. One of the most controversial allegations against Mother Teresa was her practice of baptizing dying patients without their consent, particularly in India, where non-Christians made up the majority of the population. She called this act a ticket to heaven. Eyewitness accounts describe how, in their final moments, individuals of different faiths were covertly baptized into Christianity. The ethical implications are significant. Was this genuine compassion, or an act of imposing her beliefs on vulnerable people at their weakest moments? The baptisms raised concerns about religious manipulation under the guise of charity, casting a shadow over her commitment to respecting the dignity of all faiths. The question of ethics seems large. Were these actions justifiable under the guise of faith, or were they a violation of human rights? Was Mother Teresa's form of charity a blessing, or was it, as some argue, an exploitation of the vulnerable, in disguise for a good image? 6. Neglect of modern medical standards and irony. The final nail in the coffin, her refusal to adopt modern medical standards. Patients in her facilities were not just neglected, they were denied basic human dignity. A 15-year-old boy with a kidney infection died because they wouldn't provide antibiotics, fearing that helping one would set an example for others. In her facilities, critical medical needs were ignored, and patients were subjected to unnecessary suffering, all in the name of spiritual salvation. Colette Livermore, who served as a nun for 11 years in Mother Teresa's order in Calcutta, wrote, "Hope endures." In the book, she wrote that Mother Teresa refused to provide low-cost anti-malarial drugs for the sisters, leaving them at risk of contracting this deadly disease. But here's the irony. When Mother Teresa herself fell ill, the very woman who had spent a lifetime denying others modern medicine chose to seek the best that the world had to offer. Mother Teresa sought medical treatment for herself at renowned medical clinics in the United States, Europe, and India. She told others to embrace their pain, but she didn't endure her suffering in a bare-bones hospice, nor did she settle for reused needles or overcrowded wards. No, when her health declined, she turned to the most advanced treatments available, ensuring her own comfort and care. She publicly declined the offer of free treatment for her cataracts at a prestigious institution, only to be treated a few months later at another top U.S. hospital. When she died, Mother Teresa was surrounded in her bedroom by sophisticated and expensive cardiac equipment, which had been specially fitted for her in the order's mother house, all the while refusing basic medication for the sick and dying, although the hospice had large funds. This duality, the spiritual glorification of pain for others and the rejection of it for herself, left many questioning the sincerity of her beliefs. For her patients, morphine and antibiotics were seen as unnecessary luxuries. For her, the best medical care money could buy was an option she freely chose. The message was clear. Their pain was spiritual, but her pain was medical. And so, the question arises, if suffering was to be endured as a pathway to Christ, why did Mother Teresa herself choose another path when it came to her own life? Conclusion: The complexity of legacy. Even in death, controversy followed Mother Teresa. Her canonization in 2016 was based on the verification of two miracles attributed to her, most notably the healing of Monica Besra, who claimed 16-centimeter tumor in her stomach disappeared through Teresa's miracle. According to Monica, she went to a church where a nun tied a medal of Mary around her stomach. After some prayers and 8 hours of waiting, her tumor was gone. However, medical professionals and critics questioned the validity of these miracles, suggesting they were exaggerated or misinterpreted. Dr. Chatterjee, among others, dismissed the claims entirely, pointing out that the criteria for sainthood seemed flawed. Was her canonization driven by political and religious motives rather than undeniable evidence of miracles? The debate over her sainthood leaves many wondering whether her legacy is built on spiritual truth or a carefully managed narrative. Here's the big question: does sainthood erase these shadows? Canonized in 2016, Mother Teresa is remembered by many as a saint. But sainthood doesn't dissolve the ethical dilemmas and controversy. Her legacy, much like her life, is complex, a blend of devotion, suffering, and contradiction. So, who is she now? The saint the world reveres, or something much more complicated? That's for you to decide. And if you enjoyed watching this video, please like and comment. If you like to watch this kind of video, subscribe and check out other videos.